Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Costa, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my man Aurelian and the 3rd century crisis. I won't be talking about all the 3rd century crisis, but I will be talking in particular from Valerian's emergence as emperor in the early September of 253 AD to just about the beginning of Probus. I won't be talking much about Emperor Probus, just the immediate aftermath of Aurelian, and everything in between. Before I continue, I just want to say that this video, if you know nothing about the Romans, you may struggle a bit in following what I talk about. I will provide support like maps and pictures where support is needed. If you have trouble, you can always do a quick pause and search on Google. Now, I will provide in the description below a full list of my sources, both primary and secondary, and I will provide a link to them where I can, in case you want to read some of it yourselves. This video will be one of the more in-depth videos out there on Aurelian, specifically on YouTube. One of the reasons why I decided to make this video is because of a lot of videos out there are either too short, get the details wrong, or leave out important information entirely. Now, they're all good in their own right, and you can definitely learn something from them. Even this video won't be as detailed as it could be. I won't be talking about the economic reforms enacted by Aurelian. I may make a video on it in the future, but even that won't be as detailed. One last thing before I start. There is a primary source that I must talk about before I continue, and it's the Historia Gusta. If you know, or if anyone knows anything about the Historia Gusta, they know it's more imagination than truth. It was originally believed to have been written by 4 to 6 different authors during the 3rd century, but it's now generally accepted that it was written by one author at the end of the 4th century. A lot of what this author has written is to be taken with a grain of salt. The speeches that he writes are most definitely fictitious, but the Historia Gusta still provides important information because he does use actual sources. He just twists the truth a bit, and where I use him is known as fact. If it's hazy, I'll tell you if it's hazy. Now, this is the map I use, or I'm going to use for the majority of the video. I know that it's blurry. I try to get it as sharp as I could, as crisp as I could, but I couldn't, and I failed. If it does look good, then I actually did work something out, but I doubt it. Now, this is the only decent map that I could find that's on the 3rd century. A lot of the maps I found were either too bland, showing not a lot of detail, or that they were cluttered. And if you were looking at it as the viewer, it would confuse you. So this map is the best that I could find, and it's good. It gets the job done. It even has Dacia Repensis, which we'll get into. But it's a province over by just above Macedonia. But there's only one thing that's a little off. It's correct, but it's the mint cities. If you were just looking at this map, you would think that at the same time all these mint cities were in working order, but the truth is that there weren't this many mints at once, and they weren't all even working at once. For instance, the mint at Trier, and we'll get into this, but I'll get into this. The mint at Trier was moved to the mint at Lugdunum or Lyon, and so you get what I'm saying. Don't take the placement of the mint cities to be interpreted as all at once. I'll get into details as I go on. Just looking at this map, you do get an idea of the barbarian placement. So, for instance, I'll be talking a lot about the Goths, the Gothic invasion, and you'll hear me say the East Goths and the Heruli or the Borani. The Borani's not on here, but the Borani will be around the East Goths, and I'll talk about that. I'll zoom into the location so you can get a further understanding. And without further ado, let's begin. It's the year 253 AD, and Emperor Gallus will send word to Valerian, who's stationed in the province of Rhaetia, to gather an army and engage his rival Aemilianus. However, before Valerian could gather his troops, as he will withdraw troops from the Rhine frontier, Aemilianus will have crushed Gallus in Italy. As a result of Gallus's demise, Valerian's men will proclaim him emperor. But before he's even able to cross the Alps, Aemilianus will have been assassinated by his troops, the same troops who proclaimed him emperor. And by early September of 253 AD, Valerian will emerge as the emperor. Immediately, the first things he'll do is appoint his son Gallienus as co-emperor, giving him the title of Caesar. At the same time Valerian became emperor, Goths crossed the lower Danube. The problem in the Balkans will be of the utmost priority. The destruction of Emperor Decius's army at Abitris in 251 by the Goths and the withdrawal of troops in the area by Aemilianus had left the Danube frontier desperately underdefended. The rampaging Goths will go as far as Thessalonica, besieging the city. Valerian will rush towards the Danube. One of his top strategies will be to reinforce many of the major cities and strategic points in the area. But he'll only be able to partially implement this. And the reason is because of two things. A problem will occur because of Valerian's withdrawal of the troops on the Rhine frontier to face Aemilianus. The Rhine frontier will be left underdefended, which will give reason for the Alemanni to renew their raids on the region. And you'll see this as one of the major reasons why Postumus came to be proclaimed emperor, because what will end up happening is because Valerian withdrew his troops from the Rhine frontier, the Alemanni will break through the defenses and wreak havoc upon the area. While Valerian is in the Balkans and the Alemanni are renewing their raids on the Rhine, you have Persia under King Shapur I in the east overrunning most of Syria, making this one of the most devastating invasions the Romans face in the east since Crassus's humiliating defeat against the Parthians. Now, Shapur is invading the Romans because Emperor Philip the Arab, the previous emperor, made peace with Shapur after Emperor Gordian III's failed attempt to invade the Sassanids. But only after 2 years of making peace with Shapur, he broke the peace agreements, which was to pay tribute and to give the Sassanids control of Armenia, and began attacking the Sassanids once again. Emperor Philip will send an expedition into Persia, but it will fail due to Philip being needed on the Danube frontier. Shapur will intervene in Armenia in 251 AD, and in the following year, he will easily defeat the Roman armies and garrisons in Mesopotamia and completely overrun Syria, sacking many of the wealthy cities, including Antioch. Then in 253 AD, Shapur will renew his offensive once again, but this time he'll be met with a local by the name of Herennius Antoninus. He's a local of Emesa. Herennius will have rallied and organized the Roman forces in the area in defense of this invasion, and as a result will have been proclaimed emperor. Valerian now has to deal with a usurper being acclaimed in Emesa on top of these two big events. But the reason why Herennius is proclaimed emperor is not because Herennius wants to usurp the throne of Valerian, but rather this is a result of the immediate need of an emperor on the spot. Valerian's attention will be immediately to the east because that's where most of the empire's wealth comes from, the provinces of Asia Minor. Not to mention the threat the Persians pose to Egypt, which is one of the major breadbaskets of the empire, the other being Carthage. Valerian will decide to leave his son and co-ruler Gallienus to campaign in the Balkans to mop up the Gothic threat, and Gallienus will spend some time there, but soon after his attention will be needed on the Rhine frontier. However, the Gothic raids are still persisting all over the Danube, and in addition to this, you have the East Goths and the Barani sailing across the Black Sea and raiding the northern Anatolian coast from Trapezus to Nicaea to deep into Cappadocia. Valerian will have arrived in the east by 254 AD, and the invasion will have died down a bit. Herennius is no more has heard of him. He's probably most likely killed. Over the next 5 years, Valerian will conduct campaigns against the Persians, retaking the very important stronghold of Nisibis. Now, the map I'm showing you, this is a map of 117 AD, so it's inaccurate. However, the reason I'm showing this is because Nisibis is on the map. I couldn't find a relevant 3rd century map with Nisibis on there, that without it being too full of detail that you wouldn't really understand. But in 259 AD, Valerian will have to abandon his campaigns and head to Asia Minor to deal with a barbarian invasion. Shapur will exploit his absence and sack Dura Europus near Palmyra. So for the time being, I will leave Valerian in the east, and I will focus on Gallienus. During the mid-250s, Gallienus will be raising his eldest son, Valerian II. He'll appoint him to the junior imperial rank of Caesar. With the situation on the Rhine rapidly deteriorating, he will leave behind his son to represent the emperor on the Danube, and he will go himself to the Rhine. The Alemanni are raiding between the Upper Rhine and the Upper Danube, and are now plundering deep into northern Gaul. Gallienus will arrive at Trier, and the real name you'll be seeing before you now on your screen. As you can see, this is why I won't pronounce it. The reason he'll go to Trier is because the city is near the frontier, and it will give him easy access to a good portion of the river. He'll be able to contain the invasion using the city of Cologne as a strategic base and getting a number of victories against the barbarians. He'll finally be able to restore the Roman defenses on both sides of the frontier, but in 258, Gallienus will receive news that his son Valerian II has died. How Valerian died, I don't know. The Historia Gustav will say that his life contained nothing worthy of note, save that he was nobly born, excellently reared, and pitiably slain. Gallienus will again elevate his younger son, Saloninus, to the rank of Caesar. Saloninus will, he's a young boy at this time, and he'll remain with his father on the Rhine while the Danube frontier receives constant barbarian raids, while at the same time lacking that presence Valerian II provided in his father's absence. With Valerian II now gone and both emperors are occupied with invasions, a usurper will rise on the Danube. His name is Ingenuus, a military commander decides to rise up and proclaim himself emperor. But before he could establish anything, Gallienus leaves his son behind with one of his administrators named Silvanus. With a series of forced marches, he'll come down from the Rhine and quickly crush Ingenuus. And it is here that Gallienus will receive the horrible news. 2 years after his son's death, in 260 AD, his father, Emperor Valerian, will have been taken captive and his army will have been destroyed. What happened was that when in 259 AD, when Valerian had to go back to Asia Minor to deal with the barbarian threat, Shapur took advantage of this. Launching his third major offensive, he will go through Mesopotamia, retaking the Cebes. During this time, Valerian's troops are suffering from plague, killing a good portion of his men. But once Valerian hears of Shapur's invasion, he will swiftly head back. This time he will go to the city of Edessa, massing his troops. And in the summer of 260, Valerian will leave Edessa and head towards Carrhae. Somewhere in between the two areas, King Shapur and Emperor Valerian meet, and King Shapur wins a decisive victory, capturing Valerian alive. Now, it is said that when King Shapur captured Valerian, he used him as a step stool to mount his horse. If so, that is one of the most masculine things I've ever heard. You know how you take a Roman emperor, a man of immense prestige and wealth, right, and power, and you just you force him onto his hands and knees, and you just mount your horse, just another day, another servant. I don't know, that's just that's really cool to me. Now this is a monument. It's called Nakshe Rostam. It's in about 12 kilometers northwest of Persepolis. That's about 7.5 miles, located in the Fars province in Iran. But looking at the image, kneeling before King Shapur is Philip the Arab, and standing right beside him is Emperor Valerian. Shapur the First is, as you can see, mounted on his horse, and his left hand is gripping the hilt of his sword. And you can see on his head, resting on his head, his enormous crown. And behind him, you can just make it out, right on the edge. You see just his torso, and above that's the high priest. I believe his name is Cartier. I know I'm probably butchering his name. If you look at King Shapur, he's grabbing Valerian's hand, showing his dominance over him. And Valerian will live a miserable life, and he will die in captivity. Another photo here is This is a Christianized version of events, and I've zoomed in on the photo. This is the same event being depicted, King Shapor's victory over Valerian, using him as a human step stool. You can see that is obviously a white version of King Shapor stepping on the back of Emperor Valerian, who here looks like a bishop to me. He looks like his clothing doesn't really mark an imperial one, and yeah, it's interesting to see. I mean, this is a nice little photo, but let's move on. The news of Valerian's fate will sweep across the empire. The Alemanni, upon hearing the news, renewed their attacks once again and completely overran the Rhine frontier. Then, along with the Chthungi tribe, crossed the Danube, then the Alps, and made it as far as Ravenna. This will throw Rome into a panic. It has been the first time in centuries that barbarians had invaded Italy. Gallienus once again surges towards Italy and defeats the Alemanni and Chthungi, but not entirely, and the barbarians are able to make it back over the Alps and cross the Danube with the loot they had acquired. The Franks will attack, rampaging in Gaul and even making it as far as Spain, besieging and sacking the city of Tarraco. On top of this, you have usurpers rising in Greece and in the east, and now you have the rise of Postumus. Silvanus, who is basically Salonus's caretaker, will have a dispute with Postumus over loot that had been acquired from a Frankish raiding party, and he'll want Postumus to give Silvanus the loot, but Postumus will instead give the loot to his men. Silvanus will persist, and as a result of this, Postumus's men will declare him emperor. Silvanus and Salonus will go to the city of Cologne to try and rally the troops who are stationed there, but this will be to no avail. Postumus will come in and besiege the city for over 6 months, and while this is going on, Gallienus is going to be unable to do anything. He still has to deal with the Alemanni and the Chthungi in Italy, and now he has to deal with usurpers rising in Greece and in the east. And what's going to end up happening is, well, Salonus will die. He will, and along with Silvanus, they both will die. Now, Gallienus has lost 2 sons and a father. What Postumus will end up doing is, because of the Frankish threat that loomed over the area that he's, now ruling over, or proclaiming himself emperor in, he will not seek out an engagement with Gallienus. Instead, Postumus will opt to wait for him. So while Postumus is waiting for Gallienus to seek him out, Gallienus will be mopping up the barbarian threat in Italy. And luckily for him, what will end up happening is, in 261, one of the usurpers by the name of Regalian, he will die defending the frontier. So too will Valens, another usurper in Macedonia. And Gallienus will send 2 generals, one of his best generals, Aureolus and Domitianus, and they will end up defeating the 3rd usurper named Marcianus, and more details on him later when I discuss the East. After him, another usurper will be killed in Syria by Odinathus, who I will also get to. With the central part of the empire secured, Gallienus will finally be able to move against Postumus in the mid-260s. He'll set out crossing the Alps and moving into Gaul, and there Gallienus will win a decisive victory over Postumus, but due to Aureolus most likely hesitating on purpose, Gallienus won't be able to go any further. However, soon he will renew his attack, but during a siege, Gallienus will end up being seriously wounded. The Historia Gustav will say that he was wounded by an arrow. And that will be the last time Gallienus will go on the offensive against Postumus. During this time, it is most likely that Aureolus is betraying Gallienus, but Gallienus will decide to give him the benefit of the doubt. This he will come to regret, as Aureolus will eventually try to join Postumus, and more on that later. So, since Postumus has been able to defend the Rhine frontier, this will make him extremely popular amongst his men and the people of that region. This success will allow him to remain in power for 9 years, until in 269, when he was killed by his own soldiers. But before we get to the years leading to Aurelian's ascension, we must now turn our attention to Odinathus and the city of Palmyra. Palmyra was a city located in an oasis in the Syrian province. It's located right at the eastern edge of the Syrian province and right in the desert. It was the most important city in the region. All trade from the Silk Road flowed through Palmyra. The city itself was mostly autonomous. Hadrian, during his reign, granted Palmyra the status of a free city, and by the time of Aurelian, it had the status of colonia. The power it attained was almost entirely through commerce. The city of Palmyra will supply Rome with a number of auxiliaries, which would help a lot with the defense of the eastern frontier. Palmyrene archers will be the most important, but most notably by Aurelian's time, the Palmyrene heavy cavalry will become the most important, as it was the answer to the Persian cataphracts. Odenathus, who would come to rule the city of Palmyra, belonged to one of the leading families of the city, which had Roman citizenship granted to them by Septimius Severus, who ruled from the end of the 2nd century into the beginning of the 3rd century. Odenathus was involved in Emperor Philip's Persian Wars of the 240s and was commander of the Palmyrene forces, and it was during this time that he earned the rank of senator, which was a position bestowed upon people who were well liked by the emperor. It also, around this time, he's declared ruler of Palmyra. Odenathus will really start to grow Palmyra into a superpower, so to speak, and by October 251, Odenathus will acknowledge his son Septimius Hiren as co-ruler, and he will have the same honors as his father. Now, the following years when King Shapur will begin his great invasion of the East, which I already talked about, and what part Odenathus played in the early invasions, I'm uncertain. From what I know, he attempted to, allegedly at some point try to come to an arrangement with Shapur. Of what I don't know, but apparently Shapur will come to reject Odenathus's gifts by tossing them into the Euphrates River. And around 256 to 257, he will sack Dura Europus, which is close to the city of Palmyra. By 258 AD, Odenathus will receive the consular rank by Valerian. Realizing the threat Shapur posed on Palmyra, Odenathus will begin a guerrilla-style warfare against him. This would come in the aftermath of Valerian's capture in 260, but Odenathus would not be alone in this endeavor. Two of Valerian's generals, Marcianus and Ballista, would rally what remained of the shattered Roman troops, and they too will harass the armies of King Shapur. Odenathus would devastatingly harass Shapur and his troops on their journey back through Syria on their way to Ctesiphon. Now, by this time, with Valerian's capture, as I talked about with Gallienus, a multitude of usurpers would rise and proclaim themselves emperors. Marcianus will be one of these people. This will be the same Marcianus that Gallienus' generals Areolus and Domitianus will end up defeating. You see, Marcianus will declare his sons, also named Marcianus, and Quietus as joint emperors and push for his rule over the whole empire. He'll take his troops to the Balkans, and it is there that Areolus and Domitianus will defeat him with a resounding victory. Odenathus, cunning as he was, seized the opportunity to gain favor with Gallienus, as he originally was neutral through this whole endeavor, and he will come down hard on Marcianus and his two children, who at this point are pretenders. Ballista, who I mentioned earlier, will end up praetorian prefect of the two children, and will end up defeated by Odenathus, and this will allow Odenathus to lay siege to the city of Emesa, where the two children were living in. From what I read, Emesa will end up turning on Quietus and Marcianus, killing them, allowing Odenathus' victory. So, in name, the East will return to Gallienus' rule, but Odenathus will end up wielding the real power of the East. As a result of this victory, Gallienus will end up making Odenathus vice-regent of the East, bestowing the title of Corrector Totius Orientis, which means corrector of the East. In 262 AD, Odenathus will launch an offensive. He will regain northern Mesopotamia from Persian control, recapturing the vital stronghold of Nisibis, and Odenathus will launch a counter-invasion against the Persians. He will end up taking the title King of Kings, a title meant for Persian kings, and again in the year 266 to 267, he will go on another invasion of the Persians, reaching and besieging Ctesiphon, but he will fail in taking it. And as per usual, from these victories, he will be proclaimed emperor by his troops. Now you know the drill when someone is proclaimed emperor, but Gallienus will end up allowing this to happen. You have to remember that right now, Gallienus can't afford to challenge Odenathus, and by 267 AD, that will be the height of Odenathus' power. So now that we have caught up to Gallienus. We have talked about Posthumus and the rise of Odin Athos. I would just like to quickly recap the 250s. In the 250s, the barbarian invasions, especially the ones around the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea on the side of Asia Minor, will have seen much devastation, especially the coastal cities, but the interior will have suffered as well. The constant threat of Rome's frontiers and the constant need for an emperor on the spot will give rise to Posthumus and Odin Athos. Now, to go from where we left off, 267 AD, for Gallienus, things must have seemed like they were easing up. The power vacuum that exploded after the capture of Valerian had been quelled for the most part, and the east had been dealt with by Odin Athos. Posthumus shows no signs of invading Italy, and we even have coins that were minted by Gallienus, which states that peace had been restored everywhere. And here is the picture of the coin. And we know that, peace hadn't been restored everywhere, but it must have seemed like things have quelled so much that maybe you can breathe a little bit. But here on the coin number one, I have two coins to show. You have on the obverse, you have the bust of Gallienus, and on it is written Gallieni Augusti, and on the reverse, you have ubique pax. Now, if you know anything about Roman history, and maybe you learned about it in school, the Pax Romana, Roman peace, right? Pax is peace, and then ubique means everywhere. But, you take it as peace is restored everywhere. And also on the portrait, on the reverse, you have the goddess Victoria on a chariot holding the reins and whip, signifying victory. And coin number two is the same thing. On the obverse is Gallieni Augusti, on the reverse ubique pax, with the same portraits and just a different, a slightly different style. And you could tell the difference just by looking. To continue on, while peace, quote unquote, reigned everywhere, Gallienus will receive news in the late summer of 267 of a massive Gothic invasion of the Balkans and Asia Minor. Gallienus will leave Aureolus in Milan or Mediolanium to safeguard Italy from either Posthumus or the Alemanni. Gallienus will swiftly go to the Balkans. Now, this is where the future emperor Aurelian comes in. He will have most certainly have been amongst the senior officers with Gallienus at this time, and by this point, Aurelian is in his mid-50s. On top of this news, still in 267 AD, the Heruli will launch a seaborne invasion which will raid along the western shore of the Black Sea, attacking coastal cities and even sacking Byzantium, which will one day become Constantinople. They will try to raid the Bithynian coast, but a naval encounter will have damaged them greatly, but this will only change their course of direction. The Heruli will end up raiding the poorly defended Greeks, sacking the islands of Lemnos and Skyros, and then they will sack Athens. There is a story that the Heruli were gathering all of the books in Athens and were planning to burn them, but one of their men convinced the leader not to, stating that the Athenians were not skilled in war, but skilled in books. Did this really happen? Who knows, but I think it's pretty neat. From there, they will make their way down the isthmus and raid Argos, Sparta, and Corinth, until the historian Dexippus organized a group of Athenian militia. They will attack them upon their return back up the isthmus, and I will read to you an excerpt from one of Dexippus's fragments. And it's a speech that he wrote and supposedly said, although take it with a grain of salt. With these speeches, a lot of historians take inspiration from Thucydides. And if you don't know who Thucydides is, he was a Athenian general during, I believe, the Peloponnesian War. And he was an historian as well. And he wrote speeches that he either said or he would fill in speeches that he thought would best sound like the appropriate speech of that time. And this would carry on through so many historians who would try to fill in the speeches, and you can never really trust them. But it does give you an insight to how the historian himself, or maybe even people of that area and time period, thought. Just know that the speech itself is fragmented. We don't have a lot of works by Dexippus, even though He does seem to be a very reliable historian. And wars are decided by courage rather than numbers. We have no mean force. 2,000 of us gathered in all, and we have this deserted spot as a base from which to damage the enemy by attacking him in small groups and ambushing him on his way. Once we gain an advantage thus, our forces will swell and we shall strike no small fear into the enemy. If they come against us, we shall resist. We have an excellent defense in this rough wooded position. If they assault us from different directions, they will be thrown out by fighting against men who are unseen and not fighting like those they have faced before. They will break their line and will not know where to direct their arrows and darts, will miss their aim, and continue to suffer from our attack. We, protected by the wood, will be able to shoot accurately from positions of advantage, and will apply ourselves safely in minimal danger. As for regular battle, if that is necessary, realize that the greatest dangers call forth the greatest courage, and at the extremity of hope, endurance comes more readily. Often the unexpected has happened, when men are forced by circumstances and fighting for things they love in hope of revenge. We could not have before us a greater cause for anger, since our families and our city are in the hands of the enemy. Those, too, who have been forced against their will to fight alongside the enemy, would, once they realize our approach, join in the attack on them in the hope of freedom. I learn that the Emperor's fleet is approaching to aid us. Joined with them, we shall fight nobly. And in addition, I think we shall arouse the other Greeks to the same valor. I myself face the same danger and the same misfortune willingly, seeking honor in danger, longing to realize this. Death comes to all men, but to lay down one's life in defense of one's country is the noblest of prizes, which brings eternal fame. If anyone, even after what has been said, is dismayed by the fall of the city and so downhearted, let him realize that many cities have been taken by a ruse of their enemies. Fortune, too, should be on our side, for our cause is just. We resist those who have gratuitously wronged us, and the divine will plays with human affairs in this way, that it most eagerly relieves misfortune and restores the sufferers. It is a noble fate to spread the glory of our city, to be ourselves an example of courage and the love of freedom to the Greeks, and to win among men now and in the future an undying fame, showing by our actions that even in disaster the resolution of Athenians is not broken. Let our watchword in battle be our children and all that is dearest to us, and to save these let us set out together for the conflict, calling on the gods who watch over and aid us. From Dexippus's speech, you can get a sense of the gravity of the situation. Dexippus's resistance will push the Aureli north, and it won't be until one of Gallienus' top generals, Marcianus, not to be confused with the usurper in the east, who was destroyed by Areolus and Domitianus, Marcianus will approach the Heruli with a sizable Roman force in Boeotia, but it will not be enough to completely defeat them. But what will end up happening is he will drive them north through Epirus and Macedonia, where Gallienus will arrive in the spring of 268, and on the border of Macedonia and Thrace, in the valley of Naissos, he will defeat them. After defeating the Heruli, Gallienus will allow them safe conduct back home, and it will be at this time that Areolus, whom Gallienus left behind at Milan, will revolt. Gallienus will sense the gravity of the situation. If he loses Italy, he's basically as good as dead. And so Gallienus will gather a large force, leaving Marcianus behind in charge of the defense of the Balkans, and Aurelian will accompany Gallienus. Now, in both the Historia Gusta and Zosimus, they will both say that Areolus proclaimed himself emperor. However, we know that this is not the case. What actually ends up happening is Areolus will turn in his lot with Postumus and try to side with him. We know this because of the coins minted during this revolt from the mint of Milan will depict Postumus on the coin rather than Areolus. Here is one of the coins minted in Milan. On the obverse, as you can see, it says, going from left to right, it says IMP, which I'm assuming stands for Imperator. And then you have C. If I was going to take a guess at that, which may be a stretch, I would think Concordia. Not sure, maybe Consul. Then you have his name, Postumus. And then there's the P and F, which I'm not sure what that would stand for. And then you have AUG, which is the abbreviation for Augustus. On the reverse, It's supposed to say Salus and Augustus. Salus Augustus. I'm not sure what Salus means. I did a Google Translate, but you can never trust those things. It says safety, so I'm not sure. But let's move on. Now, this will prove fatal for Aurelius because Postumus will not help him and will leave him to his own demise. Now, Aurelius was master of the horse, which is leader of the cavalry, and now that he is gone, future Emperor Claudius will now be promoted to master of horse. Gallienus will defeat Aurelius' army at Pons Aurelius, and Aurelius will retreat back into Milan, and it is here that Gallienus will meet his demise. Now, Gallienus and his father, Valerian, had a knack for spotting talented individuals and promoting them to positions of importance. These decisions will warrant him unpopular by the Senate, as military positions were usually reserved for senators. But this will ultimately prove successful, as the military during the 3rd century crisis will have been competent and talented commanders, which there is no doubt that if it weren't for these people, the Roman Empire wouldn't have survived. Now, a few key people that Gallienus had promoted to his senior officers are Aurelian, Claudius, who's master of the horse. We have Heraclianus, his praetorian prefect, Macrianus, governor of Lower Moesia, the man left behind in the Balkans, and Cecropius, the commander of the Dalmatian horse. These people will be in on the plot to assassinate Emperor Gallienus. Now, the story goes that one night while they were camped during dinner, Cecropius informed Emperor Gallienus that Aurelius had left Milan and was on his way with an army to engage him. Emperor Gallienus, in a rush, gathered his arms and his horse, not waiting for his armed bodyguard, and rode off to meet Aurelius in battle. And when the assassin saw that he was without his bodyguard, he killed him. Now, as for who initiated this plot, some sources say Heraclianus, some say Aurelian, but it is agreed that they were both in on it, including Claudius. Immediately after Gallienus' demise, Claudius is elevated to emperor. And for Macrianus, whom I've mentioned being in on the plot, his role in it was that he supported the idea. Now let's recap Emperor Gallienus before I continue on with Claudius and soon Aurelian. It really takes someone special to do the job that Gallienus had to do. To be emperor, a thankless job, who in the decades prior to his role were dropping like flies. It really takes a lot of character and courage to withstand all of what happened. He lost his father and his 2 sons who were killed. It's not even like they died by accident or something. They were killed. He was constantly moving, taking on the barbarians who raided and pillaged and devastated parts of his empire. He had to deal with Postumus and the West Rebellion, not to mention the countless usurpers rising to take on his authority, and Odinatus, whose mere status threatened Gallienus' position. His unwavering attitude led him to promoting a series of competent commanders who I just talked about. Without the empire would have been destroyed much sooner. His only weakness was that he was unable to inspire devout loyalty to those around him. But still, this man deserves much respect. Of course, don't take everything I say at face value. There was still much to learn about Gallienus, and what I've said about him is really just a brief overview with the intent to explain Aurelian's part in the 3rd century crisis. If you would like to learn more about him in depth, the only way you'll learn is by reading books. Your local library is the perfect source to find this information, and I'll talk more about this at the end of the video. Now that Claudius is emperor, he will go about distancing himself from the plot, relieving Cecropius of his post. As for Cecropius himself, no more is heard about him. He either committed suicide or was executed. The same fate will fall to Heraclianus, the praetorian prefect. It is said that he kills himself, probably after hearing about Cecropius. Aurelian, however, will be promoted to the commander of the Dalmatian cavalry, Cecropius' old position. He is spared, most likely because he and Claudius were very close, and he was probably not as involved as the others in the plot. And in due time, he will be promoted to the master of the horse. And also, probably because of Aurelian's popularity within the army, helped with the transition of authority for Claudius. By this time, Aurelian was gaining a reputation for being strong-willed and having a stern temperament. Aureolus, upon hearing about the death of Gallienus, will try to make peace with Emperor Claudius, but Claudius will reject this. There are two versions of the story, one by Zonaras, who claims that Aureolus was killed by his soldiers, and Zosimus, who claims that Aureolus surrendered himself and Claudius's guards killed him in revenge for his treachery against Gallienus. Either way, Aureolus will die and Claudius will head to Rome to secure the Senate and become consul for the new year. Now, when news of Gallienus' death reaches Rome, the Senate will put to death his brother Licinius Valerianus and his wife and widow Salonina, and his last and surviving son. Can you guess his name? That's right, Marcianus. Because remember, at this time, the Senate hated Gallienus because he was promoting men based on merit and not birth to military commands. Claudius will in fact put the Senate in their place by forcing them to deify Gallienus. And while Claudius is in Rome, the Alemanni will exploit an opportunity to cross the Danube and the Alps. They will go with the Juthungi and pillage northern Italy. In early 269 AD, Claudius will meet them at Lake Garda and win a decisive victory over the barbarians. Aurelian will have taken part in this battle. Claudius will go ahead and receive the title Germanicus Maximus. While this is going on, the Heruli, knowing that the Roman defenses in the Balkans were severely weakened, will renew their attacks. The Heruli will be able to convince both the East and the West Goths, along with the Gepidae and the Bucini, to join them. This will be a massive Gothic invasion, by the likes which won't be seen again until 387 AD, which left both Emperor Valens dead and his army at Hadrianople destroyed. Both Zosimus and the Historia Gustav will report the numbers. They will say that the barbarians gathered over 320,000 men along with 6,000 vessels. I've also read 2,000 vessels. These numbers are doubtless over-exaggerated. But what this tells us is that it was a major invasion. The Goths and their allies will assemble their forces at the mouth of the Dniester River. They will sail along the western coast of the Black Sea and ravage the coast of Moesia and Thrace, attacking Tomi and going as far inland as Macrianopolis. From there, they will sail down to the Bosphorus, and after being hit by a storm, will unsuccessfully attempt to sack Byzantium and Cyzicus. They will then sail along the northern coast of the Aegean Sea towards Chalcidice, and they will then attack Cassandria and lay siege to Thessalonica. Not long after the battle at Lake Garda, Emperor Claudius will have received news of this invasion. Unable to go down there himself, as he's still dealing with the Alemanni and the Juthungi, he will send his most trusted general, Aurelian, to deal with this invasion. There is also another reason why Claudius will remain in Italy, is because a revolt had occurred in Gaul. A man by the name of Ulpius Laelianus will lead the revolt, and the situation will look dire for Postumus. Ultimately, Postumus will defeat Laelianus at Mainz, but because he didn't allow his soldiers to pillage the city, they will end up killing him. It's not certain as to whether Claudius planned to intervene or not, but he most likely considered it. The situation in the Balkans will be too serious for him to intervene in the West, and ultimately he will end up leaving his brother Quintillus behind in Italy while he travels to the east to join Aurelian and Macrianus. Aurelian will go with a large army, and he will bring with it the Dalmatian cavalry. When the Goths heard of a Roman army approaching, they will abandon the siege of Thessalonica, and instead raid in the northeastern part of Macedonia. It is here Aurelian will catch up to them and use his Dalmatian cavalry to win a series of skirmishes that will kill around 3,000 of them. The Dalmatian cavalry will continuously harass their flanks, and Aurelian will be able to drive the Goths up into Upper Moesia, where Claudius will arrive with the main Roman force. It is here that they will fight a bloody and indecisive battle. The Romans will take heavy losses and at the same time stop the barbarians' advance. Afraid to fight another pitched battle, Claudius will ambush the Goths, killing a large amount of them. The majority, however, will escape, and though unable to go on the offensive, the Goths will still pose a sizable threat to the Romans. The Gothic army will slowly and painfully retreat south back to which they came, and Aurelian will spend the summer and fall constantly harassing these barbarians as they made their journey back south. The Goths will begin to run desperately low on provisions and begin to suffer from starvation. Aurelian will see the state that the Gothic army is in, and with the full force of the Dalmatian cavalry, he will attack them, killing many of them and driving the rest west into Thrace. The Goths will retreat into the mountain range in the Balkans known as Mount Hymus. It is there that Claudius and Aurelian will surround them, and during the winter, the Goths will suffer from the cold, disease, and starvation. The winter cold will also have its effect on the Roman army, as parts of the army will start to break down in discipline. Even though the Goths were still suffering, their fighting spirit will remain strong. The Goths will sally forth, and Claudius will only send in the infantry. This is because Claudius probably thought the Goths were too weak, and thought that the infantry would just be enough to engage them. But as the Goths were fighting fiercely, and as the Roman infantry began to crumble, Aurelian will come in just at the last minute with his Dalmatian cavalry and save the day. But, however, he will arrive too late to prevent the barbarians from escaping. During the spring of 270 AD, the Goths will be moving through Thrace. It is there that they will be devastated by a plague that swept through the Balkans during the spring and till the end of the summer. They will be closely monitored by Aurelian, who's following them in pursuit, and the plague will also infect the Roman army. Claudius will begin to feel unwell. He will give Aurelian full command of the army, and Emperor Claudius will go to his regional headquarters in Sirmium. Aurelian will be tasked with mopping up the remaining Gothic army in Thrace and Lower Moesia. Aurelian will succeed in this, and those that did not die in battle were either admitted into the Roman legions or had lands assigned to them and so became farmers. And these operations will last throughout the summer. Claudius will take the title Gothicus Maximus, and the Senate will award him a golden shield to hang in the Senate house. However, he will not be able to savor his success for long, as he will have died in August of 270 from the plague. When news of his death reached the army stationed in Italy, they will have declared his brother Quintillus emperor. The Senate will agree to this, but that's because they had no choice. They knew the most powerful man in the empire, the natural successor to Claudius, and who would have the loyalty of the Balkan army, was Aurelian. But before I get into the feud between Quintillus and Aurelian, I will first talk about the immediate aftermath of Claudius's death. At the time of his death, the Gothic wars were still unfinished, even as Aurelian will be constantly dealing with these bands of warriors. They will continue to pose a menace to Thrace. At the same time, a seaborne raid will continue throughout the summer. They will raid all over the Aegean, although they will not be strong enough to take on any of the fortified cities. Most notably, Crete and Rhodes will be attacked, but the barbarians will have been weakened by the plague. As soon as the news of Claudius's death reached Aurelian, he would have been elevated by his troops to emperor. And they will do this happily, because you have to remember, Aurelian has already gained much respect for his efforts in the Balkans and in his efforts in saving the infantry at Mount Hymus. There will be no question as to who would become the next emperor, and when Quintillus hears of Aurelian being nominated, he will gather his army at Aquileia, a few miles off the coast of Trieste. Aurelian will immediately set out to meet this challenge. For Quintillus, however, there must have been in the air a good deal of doubt. You have Aurelian, who, as I mentioned before, has a reputation for being strong-willed and having a stern temperament. On top of that, the reputation he has earned from his victories in the Balkans. Then he has the battle-hardened Balkan army, and he has the die-hard loyalty of that army, while Quintillus only has the meager support of the Senate and a legitimate claim to the throne. If you want to joke about it, you can compare the Chad to the simp. By the time Aurelian reaches Aquileia, Quintillus and his cause will have died. There are two stories about Quintillus's death. One is that his troops killed him, and the other is that he committed suicide. In all likelihood, he probably committed suicide to avoid the dishonor of defeat. His reign lasted no more than 2 months, and Aurelian will have arrived in Aquileia to the support of the Italian army. One of his first actions will be to mint coins in the 4 mints that he controlled, in the name of Claudius, to commemorate his rule. Claudius will have been deified at this point by the Senate. The 4 mints under Aurelian's control will be at Milan, Rome, Cyzicus, and Siscia. Aurelian will do this to associate himself with the popular emperor, but also because Aurelian had deep respect for his friend and emperor. As soon as the news of Quintilis's demise reaches the Senate, they will have quickly changed sides and supported Aurelian. While in Aquileia, he will receive word that barbarians were preparing to invade to cross the Danube into Pannonia. Aurelian will gather his troops and head for the Pannonian frontier. He will set up his regional headquarters at Siscia, and it is there that he will spend the rest of the year, and in 271 AD, he will assume the consulship, probably in Siscia. Aurelian's first orders will be for the surrounding countryside to move all of their livestock and food into the fortified cities in the area. The barbarians assembling across the Danube will be the Asding Vandals. When the Vandals invade, they will find it difficult to find food, and when Aurelian sees that the barbarians have weakened, he will engage them with his forces. The battle will be inconclusive until sometime after Aurelian will score a victory against them and the Vandals will sue for peace. Aurelian's terms for peace will be to hand over hostages as well as 2,000 horsemen for the Roman army, as well as to conduct all trade with the Romans. In return for this, the Vandals will be given safe passage back to the Danube. However, this victory will be short-lived, as news of the Juthungi had ravaged and devastated Rhaetia and crossed the Alps. This will have been the third time in over a decade a barbarian army was in Italy, where Rome, the beating heart of the empire, was under threat. As soon as Aurelian gets news of this invasion, he will immediately send his main army to Italy, while he and a few remaining troops will stand by overseeing the Vandal withdrawal and the re-establishment of the frontier. Once finished, he will quickly catch up to his army, who at this point was traveling along the Via Postuma. He will move with great speed, trying to engage the enemy as soon as possible, and he will arrive in the region of Milan to find that the area had been greatly devastated, and that the Juthungi had already moved southeast and sacked the city of Placentia. He will at this point have sent word to the barbarians to surrender. They will decline. The Juthungi will go southeast with the spoils, and Aurelian will pursue them. As Aurelian is pursuing them, the barbarians will lie in wait for an ambush just north of Placentia in a wooded area, and because Aurelian had force-marched his troops, they were exhausted. The barbarians will be able to ambush Aurelian, inflicting significant losses upon the Roman army. This will be a humiliating setback for Aurelian, and as a result of this, the Juthungi will be able to press further south along the Via Aemilia in the direction of Rome itself. This will throw Rome into a panic, because by this time they had long outgrown the Servian walls, building way beyond it. This made the city completely vulnerable and at the Juthungi's mercy, as there was no army defending the city. You had to remember that the frontier armies were the natural barrier preventing barbarians from endangering Rome, and up until the first barbarian invasion over the Alps in 258, Italy has never been under threat, not since Hannibal, so there was no need to build new walls. Aurelian will recover with his army and follow the Juthungi south, and they will no doubt pass by the devastation left behind by their advance. They will raid the coast along the Adriatic, sacking Pisarum and Fanum Fortunae. They will then turn inward along the Via Flaminia, which crosses over the Apennines towards Rome. But it will be on the banks of the Metardus River near Fanum that Aurelian will finally catch up to them. This time it will be a pitched battle, and Aurelian will engage the Juthungi on the banks of the river, and as the Juthungi found a large portion of its army pinned against the river, the barbarian line will give way. Aurelian will be victorious, however the battle will be inconclusive. The Juthungi will boldly sue for peace, and Aurelian will decline. Now, before I continue, I just would like to say a few things on the Juthungi. Dexippus records the figures for the Juthungi army. He writes that there were 40,000 horsemen and 80,000 infantry, making 120,000 overall of the Juthungi forces. This is over-exaggerated. And now I'm going to read to you a piece by Dexippus. So when the Juthungi boldly sued for peace, Dexippus will write how Aurelian accepted the Juthungi embassy. He writes, in order to intimidate the enemy, drew up his army in battle array. When the muster was to his satisfaction, he mounted a high rostrum wrapped in a purple robe, and arrayed the whole battle formation around him in a crescent. Beside him he placed his commanding officers on horseback. Behind the emperor were the standards of the select troops, golden eagles, imperial images, and banners with the names of the units highlighted in golden letters, all displayed on silver-plated poles. Once these things were all arranged in this manner, the Juthungi were brought in. So this must have been very intimidating for the Juthungi. I mean, did this really happen? It was probably also over-exaggerated, but it is fun to look at, and it probably does hold truth. I mean, this probably was the way imperial ceremonies were conducted in the face of the enemy. But you go in, you're one of the few people selected by your barbarian friends to go sue for peace, and you go and meet the man who defeated you, and he has his army displayed, and the infamous Roman standard is just looming behind him, right? Looking down on the Juthungi. And his officers are just sitting there on horseback, and you hear like their swords rattling, their armor rattling about, and it's interesting to think about it. But like the Juthungi will ask for peace, and Aurelian would just be like, no. He knows that you just defeated him a while back and humiliated the emperor. He's not going to sue for peace. He's going to say no. So afterwards, the Juthungi will turn back around and travel up the Via Aemilia, and when the Juthungi reach the open plains near Ticinum, Aurelian will attack, and he will completely rout the Juthungi army, turning his humiliation earlier into a complete triumph. As a result of this victory, he will adopt the title Germanicus Maximus. Just short of 9 months into his reign, Aurelian will finally be able to head into Rome, but his visit will not be a triumph. Due to Aurelian's difficulties in Italy, a man named Septimius, a possible Roman governor of the region of Dalmatia, will be proclaimed emperor, but will be almost immediately killed by his own troops. Then there is Domitianus, the same Domitianus that was Gallienus' former general, who was with Areolus in destroying Marcianus a decade earlier. The location of the revolt is unknown. It was most likely in Lower Gaul. This is because a coin minted by him was found in that region. This revolt may have been sparked by the Juthungi invasion, but it will have died quickly. Zosimus says that he was apprehended and punished. Domitianus was likely killed. This will make Aurelian the last of the so-called great generals of Gallienus' former army. In Rome, the mint workers had begun to adulterate the coinage on a massive scale by issuing them debased and underweight. But before I get into the events of Philocesimus and the riots of Rome, I will have to rewind a few years and talk about the end of Odenathus and the rise of Queen Zenobia. Odenathus will die sometime between August of 267 and August of 268, and it will be by assassination. Who the assassin was and who ordered his death, no one knows. There are many different versions of the story, one being he was murdered by Roman officials, another possibly by Emperor Gallienus. Zosimus will say he died celebrating his friend's birthday in the city of Emesa in Syria, to a conspiracy. Other sources will say he and his son Herodes were slain by his cousin, another by his wife Zenobia, and another will be that he died in Cappadocia marching against the Goths. The version that is most accepted is that he and his son died in Cappadocia as he was marching against the Goths, but who really knows? When Odenathus dies, his wife, Septimia Zenobia, will quickly move to secure her position. Odenathus had gained his immense power through his personal character. His power base was built over a long period of time and was based primarily on personal loyalties. So as you can imagine, it will prove difficult for Zenobia to secure these personal loyalties. One of the main problems was her son Herodes was the heir-to-be. He was being groomed by Odenathus, but now that he and his father is dead, Zenobia will have to act. And she will secure these loyalties. She's a very intelligent and determined woman. The first thing she will do is immediately place her son Babylathus as Odenathus' successor, achieving the titles and honors his father had borne on her son. These titles will be Lord of Palmyra, King of Kings, and Corrector of the East. This will be done to secure the power locally, as these titles will barely have a claim, and she will have no claim whatsoever on the title Corrector of the East. That is something that has to be given by the imperial authority. And at this point, Babylathus is a minor. and Zenobia will take the title Queen and Mother of the King. This will give her the real power that she wants. Her closest advisors will be those who were advisors to Odenathus. Verodes will be one of these men, becoming governor of Palmyra. He was one of Odenathus's top generals during the war against Shapur. Her most loyal follower and the one who will be appointed supreme commander of the army will be Septimius Zabdas. Vaballathus's use of the title Corrector of the East will put strains on the relationships between Rome and Zenobia, because neither Gallienus or Claudius will have recognized Vaballathus as the Corrector of the East. Throughout 269, she will wrestle for control over the areas Odenathus came to rule. Roman officials in the area will be expected to comply to Zenobia's demands, and this wouldn't just be from Syria to Arabia, but also Asia Minor and Egypt. Now, she will do this because she knows that she has the military capability to enforce these claims that she's making. The Roman officials will be put in an awkward place as Zenobia will make these demands. You have to remember that Odenathus wasn't some established monarchy, and now Zenobia is saying that she and her son are now rulers, and they had to follow her orders even when the emperor didn't recognize this. Then, in the spring of 270, Zenobia will send her general Zabdas with a large army southwest into the Roman area of Arabia. This couldn't be ignored from Roman officials. Tracis, the Dukes of Arabia, will marshal the Roman legionaries stationed in the area, the 3rd Cyrenaica. Tracis will confront Zabdas near Bostra, the provincial capital, and Zabdas will destroy Tracis's army, killing him in the process. And from this victory, he will sack Bostra. And Zabdas will continue down the Jordan Valley, meeting little resistance along the way. Arabia and Judea will fall under Palmyrene rule, and then he will march into Egypt. The arrival of General Zabdas will provoke serious unrest in the area, and the prefect of Egypt, Tenagino Probus, not to be confused with future Emperor Probus, will be away at sea fighting pirates in the area. And these pirates may have been Goths who were attacking the ports around Rhodes and maybe even Cyprus. Timagenes, a Roman officer stationed in Egypt, will gather a large group of Palmyrene sympathizers and join Zabdas, defeating the Roman garrison there. Both Zosimus and the Historia Gustav will put the invasion during the reign of Claudius. However, Zonaras and Syncellus will imply it took place after his death. What most likely occurred is that Zabdas' invasion of Arabia and Judea took place during Claudius's reign and Egypt during Aurelian's. Probus will hurry back to Egypt and rally the Roman forces. By early November, he will have regained control of Alexandria and succeeded in driving out the Palmyrenes in the Delta. However, Zabdas will regroup his forces and move against Alexandria. Probus will retreat south to Babylon, a garrison city at the southernmost tip of the Delta, in order to join forces with the Roman troops stationed there. Zabdas will regain control of Alexandria, but Probus will secure the rest of Egypt. Zabdas will move on Probus, and Probus will position himself on high ground, but Timagenes, who knows the area well, will surprise Probus from the rear, and together with Zabdas will defeat Probus. Probus was taken alive, but he will commit suicide in captivity. With the end of Probus, Zenobia now has firm control over Egypt. Now that we have covered Odenathus, and now that Zenobia is firmly in place, I can now talk about Phillip Casillas. So Aurelian had just dealt with the Juthungi, and while this is taking place, Zenobia has taken and secured Egypt, possibly disrupting the grain supply to Rome. The problem with the Juthungi rampaging Italy will cause massive panic in Rome. As I've already said, this is the 3rd time in 11 years barbarians had entered Italy. This, with the deliberate debasement of the coinage, especially the silver coinage, along with the possible disruption of the grain supply, will cause some of the most violent scenes that Rome has faced since the last days of the Republic. And the main culprit for this violence will be Phillip Casillas. To put it into perspective with just how bad the coinage was debased, the silver coin under Emperor Augustus was 98% silver. To make it extra clear, the silver content within the coin was 98% silver. And then by the time of Septimius Severus, who ruled around 200 AD, the silver content of the coin was around 50%. And then under Emperor Caracalla, who comes after, he will further manipulate the coin. And by the time of Phillip Casillas, can you guess how low the silver content of the silver coin was? Take a guess. Come on. I'll say it. It's 1.5%. 1.5% silver in the coin. That is crazy. And can you guess what happens next? With how quickly the coin was debased in the 3rd century will lead to a rapid loss of confidence in the monetary system, and this will cause high levels of inflation, so high that by the beginning of the 4th century, the cost of wheat will be 200 times the cost of wheat in the 2nd century. The abuse of office by Phillip Casillas, who was the chief financial minister, will be so bad that it will be considered treason. He will be challenged, and as a result, he will incite his mint workers to revolt. But shortly after the revolt, he will have been killed. But the revolt will not end there. The mint workers will take to the streets. With the panic from the barbarians and the possible disruption of the grain supply, Roman civilians will join, and the revolt will become a general uprising. A number of senators will be involved, possibly those who pushed for the elevation of Quintillus. Several of them will be put to death according to primary sources by Aurelian. These senators will incite the uprising even more until a full-scale and bloody riot ensues. There will be a battle on the Caelian hill between the urban cohorts and the mob, and order will be restored. Aurelian will immediately put to death the ringleaders, as well as a large number of individuals involved. Several of these senators, as I have mentioned, will be executed, and he will shut down the mint in Rome altogether. With the immediate threat dealt with, Aurelian will begin to try and mend the problems that caused the riots in the first place. He will begin construction of the famous Aurelian Walls, as well as enact monetary reforms. So here is an outline of the walls compared to the Servian walls. You see it's much larger. Now if you look at the little slits in the outline, those are the entrances, the many different entrances to Rome. Now, these walls had to be built in a hurry. You can tell by the simplicity of the design. The only real creativity put into the walls were at the gatehouses. You can see here in the first picture the just how bland it is, how simple the walls are. I mean, the walls are huge, don't get me wrong. The problem was that there was too much going on, and time would not allow Aurelian to be wasteful. Aurelian himself will oversee the necessary arrangements to get the project going. The plans for the walls were drawn by military architects. He couldn't afford to use his men, and so he would employ the city guilds to construct the walls. The design of the actual walls was meant merely to be a deterrent, to protect Rome from a sudden barbarian attack. It was not designed to withstand a siege from an enemy with sophisticated siege machinery. You have to remember that the barbarians were the only threat to the city of Rome, and the main strategy at the time, which I've already talked about, was that fortified cities were meant to hold on long enough for an army to come and relieve them. The walls themselves could house around 700 ballistas along its walls, and even though this sounds awesome, they could never house 700 ballistas. I mean, the shelf life on the machinery isn't that long, and the walls themselves were so long that an army couldn't even man every single point of the wall. You would need a lot of troops, which simply couldn't be done at this time period. The walls themselves won't be finished until after the death of Aurelian under Probus. With the construction of the walls underway, Aurelian will march to the Balkans. His struggle in Italy was an invitation for the Goths to renew their raids in Moesia and Thrace. By the time he would arrive in the early autumn of 271, the Goths would have done considerable damage. Eutropius will say Moesia had been depopulated. Obviously, it was not completely depopulated, but we can get an idea on the devastating effects the Goths inflicted in the area. He will defeat the Goths, and they will retreat across the Danube. Aurelian will pursue, this time taking the fight finally into their territory, and there he will get a crushing victory against the Goths, killing their king, Cannabis. He will sack their settlements and deport the women who defended the settlements, and I'll explain why later on. The defeat of the Gothic king Cannabis cannot be understated. His death restored the wavering morale on the Danubian frontier as well as the frontier itself. This victory avenged the death of Abitrus, where Emperor Decius was killed along with his army. From this, Aurelian will take the well-deserved title Gothicus Maximus. Now, there are some interesting theories. One is that Cannabis is to be identified with Neva, the leader of the Battle of Abitrus. Another is that he is the son of Neva. This resounding victory will not be enough, however. For over 2 decades, the region had been under almost constant attack from the Goths. Aurelian still needed to levy troops for the war against Zenobia. What he will end up doing is one of the most defining moments of his career. He will abandon the province of Dacia and redraw the frontier. To restore the Trans-Danubian frontier would require more men, which Aurelian could ill afford, and abandoning Dacia will allow Aurelian to recruit more men, as well as reducing the amount of men needed on the Danubian frontier. The 2 Dacian legions, the 5th Macedonica and the 13th Gemina, will be redeployed along the Danube. The 13th Gemina will be stationed at Ratiaria in the new province of Dacia Repensis to guard the route of Nisus in Macedonia, and the 5th Macedonica will be placed at Oiscus, guarding the route that led through the pass of Suki to Thrace and the Aegean coast. He will evacuate a good portion of the more important citizens and resettle them along the new province of Dacia Repensis. Aurelian will spend the winter recruiting and training new troops and preparing for the invasion of Palmyra. The army he assembled was one of the most impressive of the century. He recruited men all across the Danube frontier, from Noricum and Rhaetia to Pannonia and Moesia. He had the Dalmatian cavalry, as well as the Mauritanian horsemen, as well as an elite corps of legionary vexillations, hand-picked men from all over his army, most likely the OGs from Italy, i.e. the original men who went with him to Italy. With his army completed, he will cross into Asia Minor in the spring. Before I get into the war against Zenobia, I will first get you up to speed on the West and its affairs, so that once the East has been talked about, we can have a smooth transition into the West. Postumus will die in the spring of 269, being killed by his own men for not allowing them to sack the revolting city of Mainz. Postumus's 9-year reign and the following will show one thing, that his success had created a momentum that will allow effectively the West to break off from Rome entirely. For the West to remain independent, appointing a new successor instead of reverting back to Roman rule like in the past, is unprecedented. The soldiers will immediately claim a successor, Marcus Aurelius Marius, but this guy was a chump. He had none of the qualities that made Postumus so successful, and after a few weeks, he was killed by his own soldiers. To replace Marius, they will place Marcus Piavonius Victorinus on the throne. He will prove far more worthy of successor than Marius. Upon Postumus's death, Spain will switch allegiance to Claudius, abandoning the new Western Empire, as well as the Aedui in central Gaul will pledge allegiance to Claudius. Victorinus will march his men down and lay siege to the Aedui at Augustodunum. The inhabitants will ask Claudius for help, but Claudius will not answer, and the city will eventually be taken. Knowing what happened to Postumus, Victorinus will allow his soldiers to sack the city, and in the spring of 271, after 2 years of ruling, Victorinus will be killed. He allegedly was sleeping with his officers' wives, and they took revenge on him, and after his death, they will raise the governor of Aquitania, Gaius Pius Vesuvius Tetrakis. During these times, there will be no attempt, aside from Gallienus, to invade either side. This is because of the threat of the Alemanni. If any side decided to leave their territory and invade the other, the Alemanni will surely take advantage of this, plundering the area. By the time Tetrakis comes into power, Aurelian will have already established himself in Rome. Aurelian will not see Tetrakis as an immediate threat. He was still dealing with the Goths in the Balkans, and Zenobia's activities, mainly seizing Egypt and the wealthy cities of Asia Minor, will require his immediate attention. Aurelian will leave a strong garrison on the lower Rhine and will take the risk in deciding that Tetrakis wouldn't invade, and this risk will pay off as he will be able to cross into Asia Minor and go as far as eastern Syria without ever hearing of Tetrakis invading or planning to invade. Now that we are caught up to speed in the West, I will continue on with the Palmyrene campaign. Zenobia will strengthen her grip over Syria in 270. In Antioch, many people supported her cause, and she will be able to seize control of it, stopping the mint production in the city. She will also have a powerful influence over the Jewish population in Antioch. She also befriended Paul of Samosata, a man who was excommunicated by the Christian bishops there, and he will also have a large following in the city. Zenobia will begin to reopen the mint of Antioch. During this time, Zenobia had been minting in Egypt, depicting her son Vabilathus on one side and Aurelian on the other. Here is a coin minted from the mint of Antioch. On the right is the obverse, and on the left is the reverse. We'll start with the obverse. On the obverse, you have Aurelian with the radiant crown, and the usual IMP, which stands for Imperator, and then you have C, which is Caesar, and then Aurelianus, and then AUG, which is Augustus. On the reverse, you have Vabalathus, and the abbreviations VCR, IM, D, and then R again. And basically what these abbreviations are saying is that he has the rank of consul, he's a general, and then he also has the rank of imperator. There is this idea that in the start of Aurelian's reign, he came to an agreement with Zenobia, recognizing Vabalathus as the successor to Odinathus, and bestowing upon him the same titles that his father had. But from what I've read in the book Aurelian in the 3rd century by Alaric Watson, he writes rather that Zenobia, through a series of coinage throughout the years of her rule, would slowly increment Vabalathus as having all of these titles, which makes sense because by 272, Aurelian won't even be acknowledged as emperor, and Zenobia will go through great lengths to present herself as this pro-Hellenistic, identifying herself openly as Cleopatra. This can be taken as anti-Roman, as Cleopatra had already been established as an enemy of Rome. She will win over many important cultural figures, one of these people being Cassius Longinus, a Neoplatonist philosopher and celebrated rhetorician. In the spring of 271, Zabdas will arrive in Syria, and Zenobia will be able to exert control over most of Asia Minor, including Galatia, but Bithynia and Chalcedon will remain loyal to Aurelian, which will provide the bridgehead for his invasion. Aurelian has two objectives. One, to liberate the wealthy cities of Asia Minor and to liberate Egypt for its vital grain supply, and two, destroy Zenobia and reduce the power of Palmyra. However, there is a problem. Aurelian couldn't afford to capture Syria before heading to Egypt. He will have to send an army to liberate Egypt while campaigning in Asia Minor and northern Syria. He will send future Emperor Marcus Aurelius Probus with a fleet towards Egypt. Probus will land in Egypt sometime in the middle of May, and by early June, Alexandria will be in the hands of Aurelian, and by the 3rd week of June, the rest of Egypt will be captured. The reason for this is probably because Zabdas left behind a small garrison. Aurelian will enter Asia Minor and will be greeted by the inhabitants at his arrival. By the time he reaches Galatia, the Palmyrean control will have evaporated, and he will be welcomed in the city of Ancyra, the provincial capital. His first real encounter of resistance came from the town of Tyana in Cappadocia. The town was famous for being home of the 1st century Neo-Pythagorean philosopher Apollonius. According to the Historia Gustav, when Aurelian arrived and found the town had closed the gates, he was enraged, saying that how he would not even leave a dog alive. He will besiege the town, and a man named Heraclemon, a native to Tyana, will show him a way inside past the defenses, and Aurelian will capture the city. In this instance, however, he will spare the town from destruction, liberating it instead of conquering it. This was rare for the 3rd century, and with sound judgment on Aurelian's end. There will be a problem, though. His troops, itching for a fight, reminded Aurelian of his earlier angry outburst. Aurelian was well aware of the fate of Postumus, and rather than be intimidated, reminded his soldiers that he said he wouldn't leave a dog alive, thus telling them that they could kill all the dogs. Did this happen? Who knows? But Tyana is mentioned in Zosimus, so there is some truth in what took place here. Word will spread, and many cities will welcome Aurelian as he advances towards Syria. He will travel south towards Tarsus, and then east towards Alexandria ad Isum. This city marked the border into Syria. The next stop for Aurelian will be Antioch. Now, Syria is the heartland of the Palmyrene Empire. Zenobia will know Antioch will be a priority for Aurelian, and Zabdas will set up his forces on the western side of the lake of Antioch. Zabdas chose this ground because it was well suited for his heavy cavalry, or cataphractari, or clibinari, whichever word you want to use. Now, Aurelian will have received word of the army that lay before him, led by General Zabdas. Here is a picture of the area. You have Alexandria at Isum to the north, Antioch to the south, and you have the Lake of Antioch, which has now since been drained. But here you can see where Zabdas would have set up his army, the western side of the lake. Aurelian would have no choice but to face Zabdas if he wanted to get to Antioch. Aurelian will decide to flank his opponent by traveling east to go around the Lake of Antioch and come up Zabdas' southern flank. There were many different reasons why he will do this. The southern flank was of hilly terrain, making Zabdas' heavy cavalry difficult to maneuver in. Another reason is because if Aurelian defeats Zabdas, there is only one way they can retreat, which is heading towards the city of Antioch. And if he beats Zabdas, Aurelian can besiege the city and finish them off. Zabdas will figure this out. He had originally stationed men on the eastern side of the lake on the road to Aleppo, and he will also dispatch the main portion of his heavy cavalry to reinforce them. As Aurelian is traveling east, he will be confronted by the enemy heavy cavalry. Aurelian knew he couldn't engage them with his infantry, so what he will do is he will place his light cavalry before the Palmyrene cataphractari, and what he will do is have his light cavalry charge the Palmyrene cavalry, and then right before attacking, feign retreat. This fake show of weakness caused the Palmyrene cataphractari to chase Aurelian's light cavalry. They're going to chase Aurelian's forces for many miles near the town of Emai. Soon, though, the cataphractari exhausted themselves and their horses, and as soon as this happens, Aurelian's cavalry will turn around and engage them, slaughtering the cataphractari. And as you can see, Aurelian put to good use all that experience he gained from leading the Dalmatian cavalry. This devastating victory, even though the Palmyrene still had reserves and still outnumbered Aurelian's cavalry, will cause Zabdas to retreat to Antioch under the fear that Aurelian's victory will cause Antioch to revolt against them. Zenobia will opt to abandon Antioch, and Zabdas will trick the inhabitants. Apparently, he will find a man who looks like Aurelian, and he will dress him up in what passed, I guess, as a imperial clothing, and will parade him around the streets in a triumph. Then, during the night, Zenobia and Zabdas will sneak out of Antioch, and her and her army will retreat south to Emesa. She will leave behind a small garrison in the city, and the next morning, once the inhabitants had found out that they were gone, panic understandably will set in the city, and those who sided with the Palmyrenes will flee. And when Aurelian finds out what happened, he will enter Antioch to the joyful citizens, because they don't want to get in trouble. Again, like at Tiana, he will issue a general pardon and tell those who have fled to return. And the reason Aurelian allows them to return is that he'll say that they sided with Zenobia because they had to. Aurelian will spend some time in Antioch. The Palmyrene garrison was stationed on the heights above Daphne, a southern suburb of Antioch. Also, Aurelian had to reorganize the city's administration. Aurelian will result in an all-out frontal assault on the garrison, deploying the infamous Testudo formation. They will make short work of the Palmyrene soldiers, and there was also another delay. Aurelian was waiting on reinforcements. Aside from Aurelian's original troops, which I've already talked about, if you remember the Dalmatian cavalry, the Mauritanian, and the Danubian legions, the reinforcements he will receive will be a small contingent of Tianians, fresh legionary forces from the Euphrates Valley, which Zosimus will say the Mesopotamians, the Syrians, and the Phoenicians, and he will also have a group of Palestinian auxiliaries armed wielding clubs and stabs. Once everything was finished in Antioch and Aurelian had his reinforcements, he will march south to Apamea, and then on up through the Orontes Valley to Arethusa. He will be received joyfully by each town he passes, and further south is where he will encounter the full force of Zenobia's army. Zosimus will say 70,000 Palmyrene forces. The ground chosen was on the plains north of Emesa, well suited for Zenobia's cataphractari. Aurelian will adopt the similar strategy he employed earlier at Emai, and he will send his light cavalry to charge and feign retreat. This will be a mistake, as the Palmyrene will end up pursuing Aurelian's forces, but the Palmyrene cavalry will end up getting too close to the Roman lines, and they will crash into the Roman infantry and cavalry, inflicting heavy losses on Aurelian's men. When the Roman lines started to give way, the Palmyrene pressed the advantage and began to break formation. The Romans were actually able to take advantage of this by attacking the Palmyrene flank. The Palestinian auxiliaries will be crucial in this moment, as their clubs and stabs proved effective, and so as a result, Zenobia will suffer a shattering defeat. Many of her soldiers were either killed or routed, and many will be trampled to death. Only a few of her forces, including General Zabdas, will make it back to Emesa. The situation was deteriorating fast. The Emessans were jaded with Zenobia and her cause, ready to welcome Aurelian, and Aurelian himself was preparing to close in on Emesa. Not to mention the news of Egypt probably has already reached her. She would call upon her council, and they will advise her to abandon Emesa and retreat to Palmyra, where they could still come up with a new strategy. She will abandon everything, including the treasure that she had brought with her to Emesa, and retreat back across the Syrian desert to Palmyra. Aurelian will enter Emesa to open arms. Once there, he will immediately leave with his army for Palmyra. And as Aurelian crosses the desert with his army, he will be continuously harassed by the nomadic tribes that were still loyal to Zenobia. Once he reaches Palmyra, he will surround the city, and Zenobia will feel confident that she can withstand the siege. Aurelian will sue for peace, but she will reject this. And as time goes on, and as Zenobia's situation grows desperate, she will plead with King Shapur for Persian intervention. This makes sense, seeing how he's already an enemy to Rome, but this will be for nothing. There may have been some Persian mercenaries, but they acted on their own accord. Aurelian will also employ Persian mercenaries. There's a story, which I'll read for you now, by Zosimus. He writes, "Meantime, the Palmyrines only derided the Romans, as if they thought it impossible for them to take the city. And one man in particular spoke in very indecent terms of the emperor's own person. Upon this, a Persian who stood by the emperor said, 'If you will allow me, sir, you shall see me kill that insolent soldier.' To which the emperor consented, and the Persian, placing himself behind some other men that he might not be seen, shot at the man while in the act of looking over the battlements, and hit him while still uttering his insulting language, so that he fell down from the wall before the soldiers and the emperor." It's interesting because I just picture, an archer in Sasanian clothing standing next to the emperor. Maybe he's on his horse, and he's just like, "Hey, man, you want me to take care of this guy?" The emperor's like, "Yeah, man, see if you can do it." And then he just nails him, right? I tried to find some images of 3rd century, maybe Sasanian archers or even clothing or anything like that, but I couldn't find anything that I could quickly show you. When it did not seem that Shapur would answer the call, Zenobia took matters into her own hands. Being advised by her own council, she will take a female camel and race across the desert towards Persia. Aurelian will hear of this and catch up to her at the Euphrates River, capturing her alive. Palmyra will be divided on the situation. Some called for peace, some called to continue resisting. In the end, though, Palmyra will surrender. Aurelian will issue a pardon to the general population, but he will not show mercy to those involved. Those involved in instigating the revolt will be rounded up for trial. This included several of her advisors, among those being Longinus, the philosopher. For Palmyra, Aurelian will confiscate much of its military equipment, as well as getting rid of some of the city's defenses. He will place a small garrison in Palmyra, and Aurelian will then take reparations from the city for starting the war by taking many of the city's fabulous treasures. Aurelian will now begin reintegrating the region into the empire, as well as reconstructing the Euphrates frontier. He will entrust these tasks to Marcellinus, one of his most reliable generals, and name him prefect of Mesopotamia and of the East. Aurelian will now head back to Emesa and begin Zenobia's trial. She will plead that she had been led astray by her advisors. Longinus will be sentenced to death, and for the advisors, whom we don't know the identity of, we can assume will have received a similar fate. Among them was probably General Zabdas, as no more is heard of him. Aurelian will spare Zenobia for the sole purpose of displaying her in his triumph, although there seems to be different versions of her fate. One source will say that she died en route to Rome. A few others will say that she survived and she was used in the triumph. The latter is accepted, and more will be said once I get to talking about Aurelian's triumph. With the matters of the East settled, Aurelian will take the title Restitutor Orbis, or Restorer of the World, and he will begin his march back to Europe. He will get as far as Byzantium when news will arrive that the Carpi were wreaking havoc in Moesia and Thrace. Aurelian will not delay and set about campaigning against them. Not much is known about this campaign other than that it was successful and he resettled a large group of them on the Roman side of the frontier. He will take the title Carpicus Maximus. After this victory, Marcellinus will send word to Aurelian that the Palmyrines have become discontent and appointed a man named Apsicus, or another name for him, Apsius, a noble of Palmyra. He will tell Aurelian that Apsicus had approached him, questioning his loyalty and trying to see if he would join the Palmyrines. Marcellinus tells Aurelian that he is stalling for time, pretending to think about their offer. Aurelian will spend no time preparing and immediately take his army back across Asia Minor, making his way towards Palmyra. By early spring, he will reach Antioch, surprising the citizens who were attending a horse race at the hippodrome. He will learn there that the Palmyrines had slaughtered the garrison of 600 archers, as well as their captain Sandario. Here they will proclaim Septimius Antiochus as their king. An inscription at Palmyra claims that Antiochus was the son of Zenobia. This may or may not be true. If true, then he may be the son of another man and not Odonathu's, probably after his death. This would make him less than 5 years old at the time of this revolt. Aurelian will arrive at Palmyra, taking the enemy by surprise. They weren't prepared to defend the city, and Aurelian would take the city with the help of some people on the inside. Aurelian will spare the boy, as well as deport him. He will punish those involved. Apsicus, though nothing is said of his fate, was probably among those who were punished. He will take measures against Palmyra, dismantling the city's fortifications as well as looting it a second time. Palmyra will never recover from this, and Aurelian will move the trade to the city of Batnae, far to the north, and Palmyra will become an unimportant town on the edge of the empire. And so, the city on the oasis, in the middle of the desert, which was once the main hub of all trade from China to Europe, will become nothing more than a backwater. And here are some pictures of the ruins of Palmyra. Here you can see just a general overview of the ruins. You see some camels, a herd of camels walking across. And here on the second picture, so Palmyra used to have this long road, and on both sides of it would just be these beautiful colonnades, and it would stretch on for miles. And as you can see parts of it, as a lot of it has been destroyed. You can see what looks to be a amphitheater right there in the back, and I'm assuming those large pillars there would be the entrance of the city. I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe it was a little pit stop or of some sort. And as you can see here in the next picture, just how long this road stretches with the colonnades. And you can just imagine back then that maybe some of these pillars were painted. There were palm trees, camels, and horses carrying wagons filled with grain or silks from China, or Sasanian clothing, Roman clothing. One can only imagine. Unfortunately, a good portion of the city has been destroyed by a Muslim extremist group known as ISIS. They destroyed parts of the colonnade, the Roman amphitheater, the Temple of Baal, and many others. But there's no point in really talking about it, as I think it would defeat the purpose of this video. So to lighten up the mood, if your mood has been dampened, I'm going to tell you the next part, which may or may not have happened. So bear with me as I dissect this story as it is twisted. So shortly after taking Palmyra, a wealthy merchant by the name of Firmus will stir up trouble in Alexandria, with connections to the Blemmyes and to the south. The Historia Gustav will say it was the Palmyrene revolt, but it was most likely a serious unrest within Alexandria that led to a series of riots that ended up causing serious damage to the city itself. Aurelian will quickly leave Palmyra and crush the riot with ease. Firmus will be executed by strangulation, and some of his merchant friends, the Blemmyes, will be captured and used for the triumph. Now, Firmus may not have existed at all, as this comes from the Historia Gusta. What I have told you, the riots in Alexandria and Aurelian crushing it, is true, but as for any more detail, it may be false. Now guys, for a moment I will show you why exactly this may be false. I'm going to read to you, and you decide whether this is true or not, and I'll let you be the judge. This is from the Historia Gusta. But as for Firmus himself, he was of huge size, his eyes very prominent, his hair curly, his brow scarred, his face rather swarthy, while the rest of his body was white, though rough and covered with hair, so that many called him a cyclops. He would eat great amounts of meat, and even, so it is said, consumed an ostrich in a single day. And drinking, moreover, he would compete with Aurelian's generals whenever they wished to test him. For example, when a certain fellow named Berberus, one of the standard bearers and a notable drinker, challenged him to a contest in drinking. He drained 2 buckets full of wine, and yet remained sober throughout the whole banquet. And when Berberus asked, "Why did you not drink up the dregs?" he replied, "You fool, one does not drink earth." This is what you should know, that we have found out concerning Firmus, all, however, that is worthy of mention. For as to what Aurelius Festivus, Aurelian's freedman, has reported about him in detail, if you wish to learn it, you should read him yourself. Most of the passage which tells of how this same Firmus went swimming among the crocodiles, when rubbed with crocodile's fat, how he drove an elephant and mounted a hippopotamus, and rode about sitting upon huge ostriches, so that he seemed to be flying. What I think gets me most of all is that he mounted a hippo, one of the most aggressive animals on the planet, that will kill you for no reason. I mean, this guy is a demigod, by all means. I just find it funny that some dude in the end of the 4th century is writing this. But finally, to continue, after almost 2 years in the East, Aurelian is finally able to enter Rome. The Senate and the people will welcome him, and it is at this time he will begin construction of the Temple of Sol, as well as create the new College of Priests, and begin extensive reforms of the coinage. He will also begin preparations for his triumph. But there was still the problem of the West. Britannia and Gaul still recognized Tetrakis, and in the early summer of 274, Aurelian will be ready to invade Gaul. During Aurelian's time in the East, Tetrakis will campaign successfully against the Franks, but due to the debased coinage, began to suffer economically. In the year 273, he will announce his son Caesar and give him many titles, as well as produce coinage in his name. In 274, he and his son Tetrakis II will take joint consulship. There may have been a revolt in Trier by the governor of Belgica, Faustinus. If there was one, it was short-lived. Tetrakis and his men most likely anticipated Aurelian's invasion, which may have led to the revolt in Trier, and in the summer of 274, Aurelian began his invasion by crossing the Alps into the province of Narbonensis, and will begin his march towards the Catalauni, where he will face Tetrakis. Tetrakis will withdraw a considerable amount of men from the Rhine frontier and challenge him at the Catalaunian fields. Aurelian will engage Tetrakis, and Tetrakis will be captured during the battle. The Rhine army will be slaughtered, and there's a source that says that Tetrakis, before the battle, came to an agreement with Aurelian through secret letters arranging for his capture during the battle. But this version isn't true. It just wouldn't make sense to choose during the battle for surrender when he could have done so before. The impact for Tetrakis' cause will still be the same regardless if he surrendered or lost the battle, and the loss of much of the Rhine army is a disadvantage to Aurelian, as he could use those soldiers for the frontier. After his victory, he will send Tetrakis back to Rome to await his fate and to be used in the triumph, while Aurelian stayed in Gaul to reorganize and reintegrate the provinces. Among his top priority will be to strengthen the Rhine frontier, as well as the depleted garrisons along it. He also may have repelled an Alemanni raid in the region. Like in the East, he will show mercy and avoid condemning Tetrakis and those before him. He will even keep and promote those in the administration appointed by Tetrakis. He will relocate the Trier men to Lyon, and this was most likely because of his close proximity to the Rhine frontier, as well as it being the capital of Tetrakis in the rebellious West. By fall of 274, he will be ready to march back to Rome and celebrate his triumph. Now that finally Aurelian has reunited the empire and is undisputed master of the world, Aurelian's triumph will be one of the greatest of the century. The triumph will celebrate his victories over the Goths, the Juthungi, the Carpi, the Vandals, Zenobia, and Tetrakis, as well as the restoration of the empire. The only sources we have in the triumph is a small detail by Eutropius, who says that Tetrakis and Zenobia were paraded around on the emperor's chariot, and the other source is in much more detail by the Historia Gustav, which I will read for you now. Take this with a grain of salt, as it's probably more imagination than truth, but understand that his triumph was a magnificent one. There were 3 royal chariots, of which the first, carefully wrought and adorned with silver and gold and jewels, had belonged to Odinathus. The second, also wrought with similar care, had been given to Aurelian by the king of the Persians, and the third Zenobia had made for herself, hoping in it to visit the city of Rome. And this hope was not unfulfilled, for she did, indeed, enter the city in it, but vanquished and led in triumph. There was also another chariot, drawn by 4 stags and said to have once belonged to the king of the Goths. In this, so many have handed down to memory, Aurelian rode up to the capital, purposing there to slay the stags, which he had captured along with his chariot, and then vowed, it was said, to Jupiter best and greatest. There advanced, moreover, 20 elephants, and 200 tamed beasts of divers kinds, from Libya and Palestine, which Aurelian at once presented to private citizens, that the privy purse might not be burdened with the cost of their food. Furthermore, there were led along in order 4 tigers, and also giraffes and elks and other such animals, also 800 pairs of gladiators, besides the captives from the barbarian tribes. There were Blemiers, Oxamitai, Arabs and from Arabia Felix, Indians, Bactrians, Hibernians, Saracens, and Persians, all bearing their gifts. There were Goths, Alans, Roxolani, Sarmatians, Franks, Swabians, Vandals, and Germans, all captive with their hands bound fast. There also advanced among them certain men of Palmyra, who had survived its fall, the foremost of the Senate, and Egyptians too, because of their rebellion. There were led along also 10 women, who, fighting in male attire, had been captured among the Goths, after many others had fallen. These a placard declared to be of the race of the Amazons, for placards were borne before all, displaying the names of their nations. In the procession was Tetrakis also, arrayed in a scarlet cloak, a yellow tunic, and Gallic trousers, and with him his son, whom he had proclaimed in Gaul as emperor. And there came Zenobia too, decked with jewels and golden chains, the weight of which was borne by others. And so she was led in triumph with such magnificence that the Roman people had never seen a more splendid parade. For, in the first place, she was adorned with gems so huge that she labored under the weight of her ornaments. For it is said that this woman, courageous though she was, halted very frequently, saying that she could not endure the load of her gems. Furthermore, her feet were bound with shackles of gold, and her hands with golden fetters, and even on her neck she wore a chain of gold, the weight of which was borne by a Persian buffoon. There were carried aloft golden crowns, presented by all the cities, made known by placards carried aloft. Then came the Roman people itself, the flags of the guilds and the camps, the mailed cuirassiers, the wealth of the kings, the entire army, and lastly the Senate, albeit somewhat sadly, since they saw senators too being led in triumph, all adding much to the splendor of the procession. Scarce did they reach the capital by the 9th hour of the day, and when they arrived at the palace it was late indeed. On the following days amusements were given to the populace, plays in the theaters, races in the circus, wild beast hunts, gladiatorial fights, and also a naval battle. There you have it. I mean, it really must have been a magnificent event, one that I wish I took part of, not as a captive, but more as a spectator. The fate of Zenobia and Tetrakis. There are many different fates associated with Zenobia. One source will say, which I've already talked about, that she will die en route to Rome. Another will claim that she was beheaded after the triumph. And another will say that she receives Hadrian's villa at Tibur, just east of Rome. But it is agreed upon that she received an imperial pardon, and she retired either at Rome or in the surrounding countryside. The fate of her children in Vabilatus is not known, but there's no reason to believe that they didn't receive the same fate as their mother. Zonaras will say that Aurelian took one of her daughters as a bride and distributed her other daughters amongst his men. This is probably not true, and he's the only one that mentions that Zenobia even has daughters. But it's possible that she did have daughters, but I doubt that he took one as a bride. However, her descendants will live on to the 4th century and were still known for being associated with Zenobia. For Tetrakis, like Zenobia, he will be spared. In fact, Aurelian will reconfirm Tetrakis and his son's senatorial status, as well as give Tetrakis the title Corrector Lucanii and an administrative position over Lucania in Italy. Now that his glorious triumph has been covered, Aurelian will have only a year left before his life is taken. This year, 275 AD, is not well documented as his previous years. Aurelian may have dealt with barbarians in Rhaetia shortly after the triumph, as the barbarian menace never stopped. He will then turn his attention back to the Balkans to campaign against the Goths, who were causing trouble around the Danube. Now, it is also maybe true that he was planning a full-scale invasion against the Persians, but this comes only from the Historia Gusta. In the fall of 275, in between Byzantium and Heraclea, at a place called Cainophrodium, Aurelian will be assassinated. The story goes that there was a slave secretary named Eros on Aurelian's staff who convinced Aurelian's officers to murder him. What happened was Aurelian was supposedly got mad at Eros, and Eros, fearing for his life, forged documents that condemned some officers who are close with Aurelian to death. He would show them these documents saying it was written by Aurelian, and those officers who will believe him, believing their lives are in danger, they will form a conspiracy under the general Mucapor, and when the army stopped at kind of Ferodium and Aurelian was without his bodyguard, the conspirators struck. The Roman world will be shocked upon hearing of his death, and nowhere will this be more profound than in the army. Aurelian had deep admiration from his troops by the discipline he employed. They won a number of victories together and restored the empire. When the army and those involved in the conspiracy find out it was Eros who caused this, he will be instantly put to death. Now, some sources will say the empire went without an emperor from either a couple of months to several months, and that eventually the Senate will put Tacitus on the imperial throne. This is not true. As nice as this sounds, it was most likely 5 to 11 weeks that there was no emperors. And even that is because that's probably how long it took for the news to travel across the empire. Tacitus, upon hearing of Aurelian's death, will proclaim himself emperor. As news spreads across the empire, the barbarians will waste no time in renewing their raids. A massive invasions from the Heruli will cross the Black Sea, from Crimea, and raid Asia Minor. Tacitus will swiftly race towards Thrace to assume command of the army. His first actions will be to put the conspirators to death, including General Mucapor. He will have a brief campaign against the Heruli, defeating them at Cilicia. However, he will be killed by his own troops. It is said that some of those involved with the murder of Aurelian were also involved with the murder of Tacitus. Another source will say he died of disease, but that is not true. Annius Florianus, who had been assigned to mop up the Heruli in Bithynia, will immediately assume control of the army and be proclaimed emperor by the Senate. He may also have been Tacitus's half-brother, and he will be accepted everywhere except for the east. The legions there will proclaim one of Aurelian's most trusted and competent generals, a native also to the Danubian provinces, and was most likely going to be Aurelian's successor, Marcus Aurelius Probus. After 7 weeks, Florianus will be killed by his own men, leaving Probus undisputed emperor. To see 3 emperors killed in such a quick succession caused Probus to take measures. He will round up everyone in connection with the murder of Florianus, Tacitus, and Aurelian, as well as anyone who may have even remotely been involved, and he will have them killed. He did not do this openly. He apparently invited those involved to a dinner, and then when they were defenseless, had them killed. That is the end of the video. If you are interested in learning more about everything I just talked about in greater detail, then I can't stress enough to go out and buy the book Aurelian in the 3rd Century by Alaric Watson. This was the inspiration for making this video. It made me go out and read the primary sources, those of which I could find in review of this video. It's detailed and it has integrity, and what do I mean by that? Well, any part of the history that may or may not be true, he would tell you, and I can confirm this from my own research. I've also used another book, which you may be interested in, called The Roman Emperor Aurelian by John F. White. If you want my recommendation, though, I recommend Aurelian in the 3rd Century by Mr. Alaric Watson. Don't be discouraged by the cover of the book, as I know it doesn't look the greatest, but the cover is deceiving as the content within are extremely valuable. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. I understand if you feel hesitant, as this is my first video, but know that I'm currently researching for my next video, the First Punic War, as I suspect it will be out sometime in June.